What up, fam? It's your boy, Patrick, from LSAT Lab. We're here with Lesson 7 on opinion and attitude questions. Let's remind ourselves of the landscape. There's questions testing our understanding of the big picture, the author's main point and purpose. Questions saying, what was the author trying to achieve with this paragraph, with this example, with this phrase? Questions asking, which of these details was in the passage? Very challenging questions asking, which of these claims that you haven't heard before can be derived from the passage? And then questions testing our ability to take new information and connect it with the passage. There they are, the 5 clans. It's like Game of Thrones, but way less nudity. How do we identify these question types? Opinion questions say most likely to agree, most frequently. Otherwise, they'll say, what would this point of view believe? What's compatible with them? You will sometimes find yourself doing a little bit of mind reading here. Attitude questions just ask us, what is the attitude? And some answer choices just say the attitude. Others start with the attitude and then tell you what it was directed at.
Welcome back to Everybody's Got One, the show about opinions and attitudes. For some reading comp questions, we know exactly what sentence or two we're being tested on. For other question types, there's multiple spots or maybe a whole region that might be relevant. And for some question types, we have no idea where to look. Quite rude. When it comes to opinion and attitude questions, what kind of target should we expect?
Sure. My opinion is that city target is the superior form of target. Now, sure, it doesn't have the full selection of a regular target, but you don't have to walk a mile to reach the back of the store.
Can we get this guy out of here? Next guest. I did not agree to be on this show.
When non-author opinions show up in a passage, they're usually only a sentence or two or maybe a paragraph. So a question with keywords as well is going to have a really defined target. A question that's more open-ended, like what would this non-author agree with, will probably involve scanning a whole paragraph. Attitude questions generally are semi-defined. You might see some keywords that are only in one little sentence and you're like, oh, that's defined, but the author's attitude isn't revealed until later. Sometimes the keywords are the main topic of the whole passage, so it's our job to know where in the passage the author revealed her opinion. And then comparative passages like to test us on the overall tone each author used. Author opinion questions are very common and very commonly undefined. What would the author agree with? If we remember the author's voice really only kind of showing up in that final paragraph, we know where to look, but otherwise the whole passage is up for grabs.
So what sort of target should we expect on opinion and attitude questions? Well, non-author opinion likes to test you on a sentence to a paragraph, so it's worth researching first. Author opinion is often very open-ended, so you should probably go to the answers with your gut. Attitude comes in all flavors, so it averages semi-defined. Wow, you crushed it. But I have already drawn my bow. Feels like a waste not to fire the arrow.
When we have an undefined target, we head to the answers, and we're shopping for which answer do I want to spend my time on first. That means that we don't want something with strong language or making a broad comparison, but we love answers with a low burden of proof. If it's using language like some, it can, it might. It's not required, it's not always. We want to spend our time researching whether we can support those answers. Let's practice. This is a question stem with an undefined target. We would head to the answers and try to find the tastiest answer choice to research. Pause the video and figure out which of these answers is the most eligible bachelor. And now to the rose ceremony. There's a few different categories of strong language. You have all these absolute words that are basically conditional logic trigger words. Then you have this family of words that relate to the idea of 50%. And then finally you have adjectives that just add a little extra oomph that you can't necessarily justify. A said almost none. None would be crazy extreme, but almost none's still very strong. B at first looks strong. Saying that one thing is proof of another is strong, but saying one thing is not proof is very weak. C says only. That's an absolute. That's a conditional logic word. D uses generally, which means in more than 50% of cases, large animals can't survive harsh conditions. E also uses the idea of most, and it has an absolute idea. It's useful for this, but not useful for that. So we would prioritize researching B, because all the other answers had toxic language, and B has a really low burden of proof. If I want to prove that a 174 is not proof you'll get into Yale, I only need one data point. Her name is Koshi.
Super cool for you to make a teaching point about my heartache.
You're a good sport, Kosh. So similarly, here we would just need to show that there is a species that has flourished even though it wasn't adapted. Do we get that in the passage? This is where we research. We Control F adaptation. We see that the second paragraph might be where to look. Pause the video and see if you can find any sentence or sentences that establish we've got a species that flourished but wasn't adapted. Well, we do have a sentence that says there's species whose success had little to do with adaptations. Is that good enough to match B? Well, we might have to deliberate in brain court.
So you see, we have proof that B is the correct answer.
Not so fast, Your Honor. Flourishing is not the same as success, and not adapted is way stronger than little to do with adaptations.
Do we have a most supported degree?
Says most likely, Your Honor.
Okay, then the support doesn't need to be perfect. Is it a reasonable, moderately worded claim?
Yes, it's saying one thing doesn't prove another.
And does it align with the author's stance?
Indeed it does. The strict constructionist had said that survival is proof of adaptation, and the author goes, but I disagree.
Okay, and can the defense argue another answer's better?
Not really, Your Honor.
All right, squad, we're picking B. May God have mercy on our souls. Get down!
Why do they allow Bruce Chasby to film his show in courtroom 6?
All right, let's recap all of that. When we see the author would most likely agree, we know it's author opinion. There's no keywords though, so it's an undefined target. We'll head to the answers first and prioritize any answers that feel weaker. We were wary of strong language, and we had a lot of trigger words there. And we were very receptive to the one data point formulation of B. So now we're thinking, should I go research it, or does it already feel true in my gut?
Please don't zoom in on my gut as a visual aid.
We went and did some research, and we found a sentence that was pretty close to establishing a species flourished but isn't adapted. When we're debating an answer in brain court, we can start by reminding ourselves whether we're searching for something stated or just implied. Is it a very reasonable idea that's hard to disagree with? Does it align with the author's stance? Can I actually find a better answer? The standard for being correct isn't that it's adequately supported, it's that it's better supported than anything else. We're going to try a couple questions from this passage, so first pause the video and read the passage. Welcome back. Let's try a non-author opinion question. The only text you'll need to answer this question is on the left half of the screen, so pause the video and give it a try. We're asked what Garcia would most probably agree with, and that's why it's non-author opinion. We get other keywords, which gives us a pretty defined target. In fact, it's really just the last sentence of the first paragraph. We're going to take what was said, which is that they anticipated reforms of the more militant activists, put it in our words. Being less militant means you're more flexible, more accommodating. And anticipating reforms means some of the changes you were pushing for foreshadowed what these later activists pushed for. So we have two really specific prephrases, but for a second let's remind ourselves of that strength of language filter. C, D, and E all have toxic wording, so we're not going to waste time on them at first. Whereas A, come hither wording, one data point. Let's see if we can justify this. Can we say that they had some similar concerns to the later activists? Well, we know they proposed similar reforms. Does that imply that they had similar concerns? That seems like a pretty reasonable move to make. Let's keep that around and see if there's anything better. B says that they were more politically diverse than the Chicanos. Does that mean the same thing as less militant? No. This comparison was made, but it said that this entire generation's more diverse than historians realized. Very different application of that comparison. C says that the 30s and 40s were just as militant as the 60s, 70s. That's a very extreme comparison, but in this case even worse, it's contradicted, because we know the later activists were more militant. D says most of the early activists advocated bilingual education. So that was discussed at the end of the second paragraph, but we should be nervous about how much text they are copy-pasting from passage into answer choice. What we were told is that these two groups were fighting. They were diametrically opposed, and one of the groups advocated bilingual education, but it's too strong to say most activists did. E is saying that most of the early activists were more into revolution, but I thought they were the less militant activists. When we look up that wording, we see this is contradicted. They were more into reform than revolution. Only 73% of people on our platform are getting this one right. We want to remind ourselves that trap answers love to copy words and phrases from the passage, like more politically diverse, militant, that long string of text from the second paragraph, and then revolution versus reform. Meanwhile, correct answers are giving you a meaning from the passage, but they're changing the sound or the form of it. They take anticipated reforms, run it through the complicator 3000, and give you something like, they had similar concerns. That's the feeling of picking a correct answer.
I'll tell you what. Given the judge brain doesn't even have a butt, it never ceases to amaze me how much you kiss it.
Hate the game, not the player.
Let's try an author opinion question from the same passage. Pause the video and give this a try. It says it can be inferred, that's kind of a must-be-true degree, that the author believes something. So we're inferring an opinion. Looks like we have a pretty defined target because the keywords bring us right back to that final sentence of the first paragraph. The final paragraph talks about 1930 and 1960, but only that one sentence deals with 30s and 40s. So do we see any semblance of the author's voice? Well, she positively says that Garcia provides persuasive evidence, but then she negatively says his study suffers from two flaws. So both of those are indicating the author's opinion. It feels like only the first one's about the activist, though, so let's head to the answers looking for something like they anticipated reforms of the more militant Chicanos. If we dive right into A, then we'll be thinking, did they have a common goal? Were they less militant? We know they were less militant, but that's almost so on the nose it's a red flag. The weird thing is, do we know a common goal made them less militant? Did they even have a common goal? A, B, and C are all talking about that. So if we control F liberal reform, it does say that the goal of liberal reform was shared by these groups as disparate as these. Well, was that talking about the Mexican-American political activists of the 30s and 40s? Yeah, they're talking about the League of United Latin American Citizens, the Congress of Spanish-speaking people. Okay, so we were told that these groups were diametrically opposed, and then Garcia says, yeah, I acknowledge they were pretty different, but they had a common goal of liberal reform. All right, but that's what Garcia believes. We're doing, what does the author believe? Does she show up in this area? She does, with a pivot. So the but already warns us that she does not dismiss them as insignificant. She must think that these differences are very significant. We're articulating the rebuttal position. The final sentence should confirm that or reinforce that, but I can't even read it like that, so let's put it at the bottom there. I still can't read it, it's too dense. Let's cut out a lot of words. It's saying you only need to look at the fierce controversies to see that their history's been characterized by debate. The debate characterizes their history. It's a significant part of the story. All right, so the author seems to believe that one of the two flaws that Garcia is making is dismissing their differences as insignificant. Okay, if we return to A, we did not find any support for the causal connection that their common goal made them less militant. A appears to just be some word salad. They took an ingredient from here, an ingredient from there, and tossed it together. B is saying that their common goal didn't outweigh their differences, which does seem to reinforce that rebuttal our author is saying. Hey man, Garcia, the differences were significant. They're not outweighed by their common goal. Their history isn't characterized by commonality, but by difference and debate. This aligns with the author's rebuttal. C is saying another causal claim, that their common goal helped them reach a consensus. Well, that's contradicted. Again, their history is not characterized by consensus. Here we have a pretty extreme claim of they're more or less evenly divided. We were told that one group favored assimilation, blending in like a regular US citizen, and another group favored bilingual education, which is more like cultural maintenance. And we know they grappled with the question of assimilation versus maintenance, but we just don't know the proportion of people on each side. E says that the activists didn't fully achieve their goals, which is super weak language. Who among us fully achieves our goals? But was it because of their disparate views? We didn't read anything like that in our snippet. What about the last paragraph? The last paragraph is where the author gets into the second flaw, but this has to do with whether activists are representative of the ethnic community. It doesn't have anything to do with whether the disparate views of the activists impaired their ability to achieve their goals. So B is our best answer. It only got about 54% of the vote, so this is a level 5 question, and all the other answers are pretty tempting. A and E do a similar trick. They each say two things that are separately true. Like, it's true that they were less militant and that they had a common goal. It's true they had disparate views and didn't fully achieve their goals. But they both make a causal relationship out of those, and we just can't point to any support for that. B and C were concerned with whether the commonality outweighed the differences or vice versa, and we know the author thought their differences were meaningful. And then D just got too specific. We know they're divided, but we don't know if they're evenly divided.
Esmeralda, what made that correct answer so challenging?
Well, there are different styles of correct answers on questions testing us on what's implied. Some of them are supported by one or two sentences, but others are kind of more big picture in nature.
And correct answers use wording that wasn't used in the passage. I feel like I carry all my tension in my glutes.
We're still on the air.
Oh, can you expound on what you were just saying?
We were told the earlier activists anticipated the reforms of the later ones. That implies that they wanted some similar changes, which implies they shared some concerns.
So the correct answer on our non-author opinion question was implied by a single claim.
Well, I would love to hear more. Many correct answers articulate the author's rebuttal stance.
When we see an attribution, like some people think New York City is the most expensive place, followed by a pivot, it implies a rebuttal that New York is not the most expensive place to live, or, since they would pick different wording, there are places with a higher cost of living than New York City. A lot of correct answers just express that rebuttal position. We saw this pattern earlier. We had an attribution. Strict constructionists think that survival is always due to adaptation, but, authors pivot, she implicitly disagrees. Survival's not always due to adaptation. The fact that a species flourishes doesn't prove it was adapted. So we're articulating the rebuttal conclusion.
Wasn't our last example also kind of a rebuttal conclusion?
Yes, it was. Hold on. Let me just finish this set. It's to love.
In our last example, Garcia had said, these differences are insignificant given their common goal, and the author went, but. So her rebuttal position was, these differences are significant, and our correct answer said, hey, their common goal doesn't outweigh their differences. This answer is also an example of one that reinforces a bigger picture idea. The big idea in this passage was that there are two flaws, and flaw number one is that Garcia is undermining his thesis by emphasizing consensus and concealing the significance of difference. This is the gist of paragraph number 2. Usually our correct answer will be supported by one or two claims if we're doing non-author opinion or something that has keywords. On undefined target, we might not be able to match our answer to a sentence, but it'll align with the gist.
Is it time to talk about attitude questions now?
It is. I'll just need to think of a segue. Did somebody say segue? Where's Esmeralda? Good question.
What up, what up? Fine, I'll be back in a few minutes. Shred you later, rascals.
Well, she sure gave me some attitude.
And how would you describe her attitude?
Was it unbridled enthusiasm, detached neutrality, or resigned acceptance?
Welcome to the world of attitude. Sometimes the answer choices are just the attitude itself, but other times they start with an attitude word, and then they go on to tell you what that attitude is being applied to. We just want to always pre-phrase, did the author have a positive attitude or a negative attitude? And then let's prioritize reading the answer choices that align with that. Historically, attitude questions will give you answers that range from negative to positive. The negative should be something like disagreement or disapproval, not scorn or anger. That's too emotional. Positive should be something like support, agreement, not like a fanatical zealot. That's too strong. Neutrality really doesn't ever show up as a correct answer, so the idea of being indifferent or neutral is unlikely. And ambivalent does not mean neutral. A lot of people confuse it with that. It actually means that you possess both values. You have both negative and positive feelings. So that's different than being neutral. It just means you're torn between the two. We want to be careful about extreme negatives like hostility, condescension. Those are almost always wrong. Same with extreme positives. Unbridled enthusiasm. But also neutrality doesn't show up as a correct answer, because if the author bothered to write about it, she has some opinion. We prefer things like weak negatives, mild disappointment, hesitant rejection, or weak positives, tentative approval, reluctant acceptance. There's also a third category of correct answer that's rare, but it's like an invisible positive. The author implicitly is on board with something. So how do you justify an invisible positive? If the passage is saying people are trying to answer question X, and view A says this, however, that doesn't make sense. Recently, though, view B says that. The fact that the author pushed back against view A, but didn't push back against view B, in fact, she's letting B have the last word in the passage, that signals that she must be pretty receptive towards view B. Otherwise, she would have said something against it. When we're judging these two-word pairs, the noun is the overall emotion, and then the adjective conveys some nuance. So a weak positive would have a positive noun but a negative adjective. Hey guys, how do you feel about the Lord of the Rings trilogy?
Great special effects, but too long, too much Gollum.
It messed up a lot of stuff from the books, but it was still an epic masterpiece.
Both of these people gave a qualified review. Qualified is the most important word to know for attitude questions. It means that you're not going totally in that direction. You hedge a little bit. Unqualified praise would be, I loved everything about it. She didn't really like the movie, but she qualified that with a positive about the special effects. He loved the movie, but he qualified that with a complaint about discrepancies between the movie and the book.
What do you say we go get some lunch and I explain to you everything the movie got wrong?
Nah.
I'll go to lunch with you. I'm free. Ugh, why does your breath smell like Cheetos? I recently ate some Cheetos!
Just to recap, there's these two different styles of attitude question, but either way, on your first pass, you just want to focus on positive or negative. Historically, stuff that was strong or neutral was wrong, and weak positives and weak negatives were correct. But on some modern tests, we've seen a strong disagreement be the correct answer. You just don't want it emotionally strong. Ambivalent doesn't mean neutral, it means I'm torn between the positive and negative things I feel. And qualified is something that goes against the main thrust of your argument. All right, let's do one last passage, pause the video, and read this one. Welcome back. Remember that second paragraph? Were we ever so young? Pause the video and try this question. The first time the strict constructionists are mentioned, they're doing something that Darwin didn't want to do. So that doesn't show the author's attitude, but it's not great to go against Darwin. In the second paragraph, we have this setup where if they were right, then X would follow. But in fact, if they were right, every trait's due to adaptation. So by contrapositive, if some traits aren't due to adaptation, they're not right. The author then says, but in fact, some traits are not due to adaptation, which implies the strict constructionists are not right. So we know to look for disagreement on the first pass. If we focus on the core noun, C, D, and E are out. They're too neutral or too positive. Now we got to figure out if we want emphatic negative or mild negative. The last paragraph says that a certain study has undermined the constructionist claim that blah, blah, blah. It says that a certain scenario doesn't conform to the constructionist view. And it ends by saying that for a lot of species, it's not adaptation, it's just dumb luck. So the author is constantly disagreeing with them. We would be better picking emphatic disagreement, which is the correct answer.
The system sucks, but give it a chance. There's well-intentioned people that are doing their best in it. The
Yo,
system
stop.
sucks. What?
This ain't it.
This ain't what? Hold up, I'll come in there. What's up? Was I pitchy on the F sharp?
This is supposed to be punk, man. I need emphatic disagreement. That was like mild disapproval.
Sometimes the stronger attitude is justified. Alright, pause the video and read what's on screen. You haven't read the whole passage, but you've read enough to get this answer right, so pause and give this a try. We're asked for the attitude on the deep rift, which appears only in that first sentence, so we might be thinking define target. But the author doesn't appear in the first sentence. It just says there's been a rift, graduate writing programs participate in the rift, poets and writers support it, conventional wisdom aligns with this rift. We don't hear from our author in the first paragraph. So we keep looking. In the second paragraph, there's an attitudinal marker right at the jump. And there's a little rebuttal, a pushback. So this structure always means the author's starting with a concession. Certainly, it's true that concession, but here is my main rebuttal, my pushback. So our author apparently has a negative feeling towards this rift because she's pushing back on it. And then we can clinch it in the third paragraph when she's saying, fortunately, people are no longer enforcing this rift. All right, so let's head to the answers. We know we want something kind of negative. Let's try to prioritize which answers we research. Of these 5 nouns, the only negative ones are pessimism and disapproval. So let's start by scrutinizing D and E. Is the author pessimistic about the possibility that the rift can be overcome? No, that's basically contradicted. She's saying that this bias is starting to change. Is she disapproving of attitudes and presuppositions underlying the rift? Well, let's do some research. We do see that the author is saying the reason for the rift is a widespread attitude. So that part's good. Does as if indicate a presupposition? It actually does.
All right, babe, see you in a few days. You saw what I left you in the fridge? Yeah, you prepared 3 days worth of food for me, as if I wouldn't know what to cook for myself. And I love you.
They don't write 3-camera sitcoms like they used to, do they? So in this scene, she was saying, you prepared 3 days worth of food as if I wouldn't know what to cook for myself. You're assuming that I wouldn't know what to cook for myself. So as if is a way to sort of indicate an assumption. They're assuming ability in one field is compromised by ability in another field. Looks like we can justify both attitudes and presuppositions, so this feels like a pretty safe answer. A was saying the author's perplexed as to what could have caused this rift, but she literally provides an answer, so that is more or less contradicted as well. B's saying she's astonished academics haven't noticed it. The first paragraph is saying academics participate in it, so if anything, it's contradicted. C says that she's ambivalent towards the rift. She's torn between her positive and negative feelings. No, she's negative. She's saying, fortunately, this rift is going away. So ambivalent is too weak.
Welcome back to Everybody's Got One, the show about opinions and attitudes. Before the break, Gretchen was saying her opinion is that Brad's a real suck-up to Judge Brain. Does anyone want to hear my opinion on what the Lord of the Rings movies got wrong?
No.
I guess I'll go cheer myself up by buying more crypto.
Maybe we should summarize the key points of the lesson.
Fantastic idea as always, Your Honor.
Ugh. All right, Gretchen, we see what you mean. All right, opinion questions. The key words are going to be most likely to agree or holds which view. It's testing what's implied, and it's usually harder. The correct answer is just the most provable one, but it won't use wording we used before. It'll sound like a single claim that's been complicated, or it'll synthesize claims, or it'll convey the gist of a paragraph or a passage. Take it to brain court if you need to, and remind yourself it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be reasonable and align with the author's stance. If you don't have any better answers, pick something loose. Incorrect answers often copy-paste wording from the passage, and they otherwise love to use too strong, out of scope, the wrong view, or some unsupported causality or comparison. Watch out for word salad where they just throw stuff together from different parts of the passage. And naturally, some answers just are the opposite of what the passage said. Undefined targets make us think, all right, let me find weaker answers to research. It might reinforce the big picture. Defined target, we think, let me go do research first and be stubborn about that support window. Author opinion's more likely to be undefined than non-author opinion. For attitude, pretty much the key word is attitude, but once in a while we'll see stance. We want to start by deciding whether it's positive or negative because it's almost never neutral. The best answer captures the totality of the author's opinion, and we get that in part from attitudinal markers, like fortunately, regrettably, maybe in part from verbs, like shows versus suggests. And we also get it from structural markers, like an attribution followed by a pivot and a pushback that signals disagreement. Incorrect answers might be too strong, they might be too weak, they might be too much a mix of positive and negative, they might just be the wrong direction, or it might be the right attitude but the wrong description that follows. So as we're looking at the answer choices, we prioritize getting the positive-negative part right. And then from there, you start to verify the details. Does the adjective in front of the noun make sense? Do the other details make sense? That does it for today's lesson. Check out our other videos on YouTube or come visit us at lsatlab.com.